There comes a moment in every relationship, romantic, professional, even personal, when the dynamic shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, subtly, powerfully. It is the moment you stop chasing. It is the moment you stop over-explaining. It is the moment you start choosing yourself. And when that happens, something fascinating occurs. The people who once took your presence for granted begin to feel your absence before you've even left. Because human beings don't react to words nearly as much as they react to energy. When your energy changes, the room changes. When your standards rise, the game changes. When your silence replaces your pleading, the story changes. They feel you slipping away not because you announced it, but because you stopped negotiating your worth. You see, most people are comfortable when they believe you'll always be there. Predictable attention, predictable forgiveness, predictable availability. But the moment you become unpredictable in your self-respect, you disrupt the pattern. And disruption creates awareness. Now they start asking questions. Why are they so calm? Why aren't they reacting? Why does it feel different? Because it is different. You've moved from seeking validation to embodying value. Here is what is powerful. When you detach emotionally from the outcome, you gain leverage. Not manipulative leverage, personal leverage. The kind that comes from knowing you will be okay whether they stay or go. That certainty is magnetic. And when they sense they might lose access to your presence, your warmth, your belief in them, that is when effort appears. That when unexpected messages arrive. That is when sudden clarity hits them, not because you forced it, because you finally stopped forcing anything. But here, the deeper truth, this isn't about making someone chase you. It is about rediscovering yourself so completely that anyone who wants to be in your life must rise to meet you there. When you stop over-functioning in relationships, others must decide whether they will step up or step out. Expect the unexpected. Expect conversations that never happened before. Expect accountability that once felt impossible. Expect gestures that seem out of character. Expect resistance, too. Growth always reveals who was benefiting from the old version of you. The version who tolerated. The version who overgave. The version who stayed small to keep the peace. But this new version, this grounded, centered, calm version, this one does threaten others with ultimatums. It simply moves differently. And movement creates momentum. Some will chase. Some will adjust. Some will disappear. Let them. Because the real transformation is what they do next. It is who you will become in the process. When they feel you slipping away, what they're really feeling is the loss of access to a version of you that no longer exists. And that's not something you fix. That's something you honor. Stay steady. Stay grounded. Stay unavailable to anything that requires you to shrink. The unexpected is about drama. It is about alignment. And alignment changes everything. Energy speaks louder than words, because before anyone processes what you say, they feel who you are. Long before logic enters the conversation, emotion has already shaped the outcome. You can tell someone you are fine, but if your shoulders are tense, your responses are short, and your presence feels distant, the truth has already been communicated. Words are deliberate. Energy is honest, and people trust what feels real more than what sounds right. When you walk into a room, you don't have to announce your confidence. It sensed in the way you stand, the way you make eye contact, the way you don't rush to fill silence. Likewise, insecurity does need an introduction. It shows up in over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-compensating. Energy reveals what words attempt to manage. That's why someone can say, I love you. But if their actions lack consistency, the words feel empty. Alignment between internal state and external behavior is what creates trust. In relationships, this becomes even more powerful. If you constantly tell someone they matter to you, but tolerate being treated as an option, your energy communicates fear of loss, and fear shifts the dynamic. It subtly hands power to the other person. But the moment you ground yourself, when you decide that your worth is not up for negotiation, your energy stabilizes. You speak less, but mean more. You react less, but observe more. And that calm certainty creates impact. Energy is also contagious. When you are anxious, others become defensive. When you are calm, others lower their guard. When you are secure, others feel safe. This is not about manipulation. It is about emotional leadership. The strongest presence in the room is not the loudest voice, but the most regulated nervous system. People mirror what they feel. If you want respect, embody self-respect. If you want honesty, embody integrity. If you want commitment, Embody consistency. The reason energy speaks louder than words is because words can be rehearsed. Energy cannot. Words can be crafted for effect. Energy is shaped by belief. If deep down you believe you are replaceable, your behavior will subtly seek reassurance. If you believe you are valuable, your behavior will subtly set standards. You don't have to threaten to leave. Your boundaries communicate it. You don't have to demand effort. Your withdrawal from one-sided dynamics signals it. Silence in particular carries immense energy, not the silence of resentment, but the silence of clarity. When you stop arguing to be understood and start moving according to your values, people notice. The absence of chaos is powerful. The absence of desperation is magnetic. It forces others to confront the shift without you having to explain it. Ultimately, energy is the byproduct of alignment. When your thoughts, actions, and boundaries match, your presence becomes steady, and steadiness is rare. In a world full of noise, reactivity, and performance, grounded energy stands out. You don't need louder words. You need stronger alignment. Because when your energy is clear, your message is unmistakable. Self-respect creates leverage because it removes desperation from your decisions. The moment you no longer need a specific outcome to feel secure, you shift the balance of power. Leverage is often misunderstood as control over someone else, but real leverage is control over yourself. It's the ability to walk away from what diminishes you. The discipline to stay aligned with your standards even when emotions are pulling you in the opposite direction. When you lack self-respect, you negotiate against your own interests. You accept delayed replies you would tolerate from yourself. You excuse inconsistency. You silence your needs to avoid conflict. And in doing so, you unintentionally teach others how to treat you, not because they are inherently malicious, but because human beings adapt to the standards presented to them. If you lower the bar to keep someone, they adjust to the lower bar. Self-respect changes the dynamic immediately. It communicates without aggression that your time, energy, and presence are valuable. You no longer chase clarity from someone who is committed to confusion. You no longer overextend to prove your worth. You no longer perform loyalty in hopes of receiving it back. Instead, you observe, you assess, you respond rather than react. That response creates leverage. Because when you are willing to lose something that costs you your dignity, you become difficult to manipulate. Pressure only works on those who fear loss. Guilt only works on those who doubt their boundaries. Silence only intimidates those who rely on validation. When you respect yourself, those tactics lose their power. Self-respect also strengthens your communication. You speak with fewer words, but greater conviction. You don't threaten consequences, you embody them. If a line is crossed, you address it once. If it continues, you adjust your access. There is no drama, no public display of frustration, just quiet consistency. And consistency builds authority. In professional settings, the same principle applies. If you constantly over-deliver without recognition and never advocate for your value, you train others to expect more for less. But when you articulate your limits clearly and stand by them, you redefine expectations. You become known for reliability, not availability. There is a difference. The paradox is that self-respect does not push people away, it filters them. Those who benefited from your lack of boundaries may resist the change. They may call you distant, difficult, or different. But those who value mutual respect will rise to meet you. They will appreciate the clarity because it removes guesswork. Standards do not create distance, inconsistency does. Leverage rooted in self-respect is quiet, does not seek revenge or validation. It seeks alignment. It allows you to choose relationships, opportunities, and environments that reinforce your worth rather than challenge it. And when you operate from that place, you are no longer negotiating from fear. You are negotiating from strength. The greatest shift happens internally. You begin to trust yourself. You stop abandoning your instincts to maintain approval. You become stable in who you are, not in how others respond. And that stability is powerful. Because when you respect yourself deeply, the world adjusts accordingly. Predictability breeds complacency because human nature adapts quickly to what feels guaranteed. When something is always available, always forgiving, always understanding, it slowly becomes expected rather than appreciated. The effort that once existed begins to fade, not necessarily out of disrespect, but out of comfort. And comfort, when left unchecked, often replaces intention. In relationships, this pattern is subtle. At the beginning, there is curiosity, Attentiveness and deliberate action. Calls are returned quickly. Plans are made thoughtfully. Words are chosen carefully. But when one person becomes entirely predictable in their availability, always the first to reach out, always the one to compromise, always the one to smooth things over the dynamic shifts, the other person unconsciously relaxes. They assume the connection will sustain itself without their consistent investment. Predictability sends a message: no matter what happens, I will remain the same, while stability is healthy, overfunctioning is not. If you are always the emotional anchor, always the initiator, always the fixer, you remove the necessity for the other person to rise. Growth requires tension. Effort requires the possibility of loss. When there is no perceived risk, there is rarely urgency. This does not mean you should play games or manufacture distance. It means your presence should not be taken for granted. There is a difference between being dependable and being taken as a given. Dependability is rooted in mutual respect. Being taken for granted stems from imbalance. When you constantly prioritize someone else at the expense of yourself, you unintentionally teach them that your time and energy are unlimited resources. Complacency also appears in professional environments. If you consistently exceed expectations without acknowledgement, your excellence becomes the baseline. What once impressed becomes standard. The extra effort you put in is no longer recognized as extra. It is simply assumed. Without boundaries, even high performance can be undervalued. The psychology behind this is simple. People respond to what changes. They notice absence more than presence. They notice silence more than noise. When something shifts, attention returns. When patterns are disrupted, awareness increases. If you are always available, your availability holds less weight. But when you value your time and distribute it intentionally, it regains significance. Predictability without self-respect creates stagnation. It allows others to operate passively while you carry the emotional or practical load. But when you step back from overextending, you create space for recalibration. The other person must decide whether they will contribute equally or allow the connection to weaken. Healthy relationships are built on consistency, but consistency is not the same as over-accessibility. True consistency includes standards. It includes mutual effort. It includes the understanding that both individuals are choosing the relationship, not relying on one person to sustain it indefinitely. When you stop being endlessly predictable in your sacrifice, you invite intentionality back into the dynamic. Attention sharpens. Effort reappears. Respect deepens. Because when something valuable is no longer assumed, it is seen again. Growth disrupts old dynamics because it changes the role you once played in someone else as comfort. Every relationship operates on an unspoken agreement. One person may be the peacekeeper, the overgiver, the one who apologizes first. The other may be the decision maker, the emotional center, or even the one who withdraws. These roles are rarely assigned consciously, but once established, they create familiarity. And familiarity feels safe. When you grow, you step outside the role people are used to. You stop laughing at jokes that disrespect you. You stop saying yes when you mean no. You stop absorbing tension just to keep the atmosphere calm. That shift, even if subtle, unsettles the structure that once felt stable, not because growth is wrong, but because it removes predictability. The people around you have adapted to a specific version of you. They have learned how to respond to your patterns. If you were always accommodating, they became comfortable asking for more. If you were always available, they stopped checking whether it was convenient. If you were always forgiving, they assumed mistakes carried no lasting consequence. When you change, their strategy no longer works. This is why growth can be met with resistance. Sometimes the resistance is quiet confusion, distance, subtle tension. Sometimes it is direct criticism, accusations that you've changed, claims that you are different. And the truth is, you are different. Growth demands difference. It requires you to shed behaviors that once felt necessary for belonging. What makes this disruption powerful is that it reveals the foundation of the relationship. Was it built on mutual respect or on your willingness to overextend? Was it sustained by shared effort or by your tolerance? Growth forces these questions to surface without you having to ask them out loud. As you become more self-aware, your tolerance for misalignment decreases. Conversations that once felt acceptable now feel draining. Dynamics that once seemed normal now feel unbalanced. This clarity is not arrogance, it is alignment. You begin to notice when your values are compromised, and instead of justifying it, you respond to it. Some people will adjust. They will recognize the shift and meet you at your new level of awareness. They may even grow alongside you, appreciating the honesty that your change brings. Others will cling to the old dynamic because it benefited them. They may try to pull you back into familiar patterns, reminding you of how things used to be. But growth is not meant to be reversed for comfort. Disruption is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Without it, stagnation takes hold. Old dynamics can only survive if everyone agrees to remain the same. The moment one person evolves, the system must adapt or fracture. That is not failure, it is clarity. When you grow, you are not rejecting others. You are rejecting the version of yourself that tolerated less than you deserved. And while that shift may unsettle those who preferred the old arrangement, it creates space for relationships that reflect who you are becoming, not who you once were. Unexpected reactions will follow the moment you truly change, because people respond more to shifts in behavior than to explanations. When you stop arguing, stop overextending, stop proving, and simply adjust your standards, it creates a ripple effect. Those who were comfortable with the old version of you suddenly feel the difference. And when familiarity is interrupted, reaction is inevitable. Some reactions will look positive on the surface. You may receive sudden attention from someone who once seemed distant. Messages may become more frequent, invitations more intentional, compliments more direct. It can feel surprising, even validating, but what is really happening is awareness. Your shift has introduced uncertainty, and uncertainty commands focus. When people sense they no longer have guaranteed access to you, they reassess your value. Other reactions may feel defensive. You might hear phrases like "you've changed" or "you're acting different." The tone may carry disappointment or accusation. But often what's underneath is discomfort. Change forces others to confront their own effort or lack of it. When you stop compensating for imbalance, the imbalance becomes visible, and visibility can be unsettling. There may also be silence, a quiet withdrawal. Some individuals want to challenge your growth. They'll simply drift away, not because you did something wrong, but because the dynamic no longer serves them. When you raise your standards, you unintentionally filter your environment. Those who valued convenience over connection may choose distance over adjustment. The key is understanding that these reactions are not random. They are responses to a new boundary, a new level of self-respect, a new emotional posture. When you no longer react impulsively, people lose the ability to predict and control the interaction. When you respond calmly instead of emotionally, tension shifts. The script they were used to no longer applies. Unexpected reactions are feedback. They reveal who was invested in you and who was invested in the version of you that required less from them. They show you who can adapt and who depends on familiarity. Growth does just elevate you. It exposes the foundation of your relationships. What makes this phase challenging is the temptation to interpret reactions personally. It's easy to internalize resistance as rejection or sudden attention as proof of worth. But neither defines your value. They are simply reflections of adjustment. The moment you stabilize within yourself, the external turbulence becomes easier to observe without absorbing. The unexpected is not chaos, it is recalibration. Systems shift when one component changes. Dynamics rebalance when one participant evolves. Some bonds will strengthen because they were built on mutual respect. Others will weaken because they relied on imbalance. Your responsibility is not to manage every reaction, it is to remain consistent in your growth. Let the responses unfold. Let the adjustments happen. Because the real power is not in predicting what others will do next. It is in knowing you no longer need to control it. The real power is internal because everything external is unstable. Circumstances change, people change, opportunities appear and disappear, approval rises and falls. If your sense of strength depends on those variables, then your confidence will always feel fragile. Though when power is internal, it is not at the mercy of someone else, as mood, decision, or validation. It becomes steady. Internal power begins with self-awareness. It is the ability to observe your emotions without being ruled by them. It is recognizing when you feel triggered, insecure, or afraid, and choosing your response instead of reacting impulsively. Most people live externally, constantly adjusting themselves to maintain harmony or win acceptance. Internal power shifts that focus inward. It asks, am I aligned with my values? Rather than, are they pleased with me? When your power is internal, rejection feels different. It may still sting, but it does not define you. You don't scramble to repair your image or chase reassurance. You evaluate, you reflect, You decide whether the situation aligns with who you are. There is space between event and response, and in that space lies control. This kind of power also transforms communication. You don't raise your voice to be heard. You don't over-explain to be understood. You speak clearly because you are clear within yourself. When someone challenges your boundary, you don't collapse under pressure. You repeat it calmly, not to dominate, but to remain consistent. That consistency builds quiet authority. Internal power is not loud. It does not seek to intimidate or impress. It is composed. It is grounded. It understands that influence does not come from force, but from stability. When you are stable within yourself, others feel it. They may not articulate it, but they recognize it. You become less reactive to drama, less drawn to chaos, less dependent on constant affirmation. One of the strongest signs of internal power is detachment from outcomes. This does not mean indifference. It means you give your effort fully, but you do not tie your identity to the result. If something works, you appreciate it. If it fails, you learn from it. Your self-worth remains intact either way. That steadiness makes you resilient. When power is external, you negotiate your standards to maintain connection. When power is internal, you maintain your standards and allow connection to adjust. You stop bending to avoid discomfort. You accept that not everyone will understand your growth, and you become comfortable with that reality. The real shift happens quietly. You trust yourself more. You second-guess yourself less. You no longer need constant consensus before making decisions. You move with intention instead of fear. And even when uncertainty surrounds you, there is an anchor inside that keeps you steady. External power can be taken away. Internal power must be surrendered. And once you build it, you realize that nothing outside of you was ever meant to be the source of your strength. So if they feel you slipping away, let them feel it, not as a threat, not as a tactic, but as the natural consequence of your growth. You were never meant to stay the same just to keep others comfortable. You were never meant to shrink so someone else could feel secure. And you were never meant to trade your self-respect for temporary reassurance. If your energy has changed, it is because you've changed. If your silence is louder, it is because you've found clarity. If your presence feels different, it is because you no longer negotiating your worth. Some will rise to meet you. Some will question you. Some will walk away. Let them choose. Because the real transformation was never about their reaction. It was about your alignment. It was about becoming so grounded in who you are that you no longer chase what does you choose you. Expect the unexpected. Not because you playing a game, but because when you elevate your standards, the entire dynamic must adjust. And as you move forward, remember this, you are not slipping away, you are stepping into yourself. And once you do that, everything changes.